So I'm curious, what brought up the Game Bee onboarding idea?
It's actually it's the consequence of a series of micro experiments I did with the Facebook group. So first, I thought, okay, my interest right now is okay. Some people are interested in theorizing about Game Bee way in the future. Some people are more interested in the transition. What I want to focus on is actually the actual scene, the network of people that are here, right? What's the adjacent possible for us? How can we become from like a cloud of atoms more to an organism, like where people like take on, obviously in a distributed way, like certain roles or provide some services to each other, differentiation and integration, that kind of thing. So I started on Facebook asking the question, what is your greatest impediment to participating more meaningful to Game Bee? So that was a poll. And I think the first two results were time and money, lack of time and lack of money. And then the third was, I'm still learning about the scene, before I can participate, I need to learn. And then I wondered, okay, the second question has to be like, what can we actually solve short term? Because, people's lack of money, which correlated highly with the lack of time, how realistic is it that we can solve it? So I made a second poll saying, okay, what among like the solutions to the previous factors, which one do you think we can solve more easily? And then I kind of like I multiplied the two. And so the place that looked like it would have most leverage is the onboarding, right? Where the people like that still are wondering, what is this about? What should I do? How can I participate? What are the opportunities, the affordances, and so on? Get a way to do that in a relatively quick way. And so that's then what sparked okay. I bought gamebee.guide, the domain. But who knows, maybe it has to live in the wiki, I don't know. That's why I also wanted to frame this in a more general way, not like what should we do with this domain, but more like, okay, what is an optimal onboarding experience? Or maybe even more generally, what is the process through which someone, it doesn't even have to be a newbie, can become a valuable participant to the scene, right? Like what is it? What is the skill set? What are the experiences? What are the videos, material, resources, links, blah blah blah. And if I had to kind of like distinguish that from any kind of that was actually thanks to a conversation with Wendy. I would want to distinguish that project from any kind of like library of theory or even beyond that, like sense making around, like the transcriptions maybe, or the wiki and all of that. I would, in a sense, that's my bias, like veer towards something that is kind of linear, and it's obviously just a guide. It's not the guide, obviously.
Well, I have some very strong feelings about this.
Please.
So right now there is no onboarding, but people are finding it, and they're finding ways to collaborate, and they're finding ways to participate and be engaged. Not everybody, but there are some people who are. And there is something that happens when you try and codify a process. Then people start to think that that is the way that it has to happen. So let's say, for example, I've been watching the Game Bee space since it was about, or the Game Bee Facebook group, since it was about 300 people. And the first group of 300 people came together and they were trying to make sense of what Game Bee was. And there was James Allen's On Game Bee document that people were co-collaborating on. And this was an artifact that was produced from a collaboration of people who were trying to make sense of the space. So that's what that was for. And then they were networked with other people and went on to other collaborations. And then that document kind of fell out of the hot spot of collaboration, right? So it kind of is what it is. Some people work on it from time to time, but it's not as active as it used to be. Then we had another wave of 300 to 400 people come into the Game Bee Facebook arena. And they were looking to try and make sense of it as well. Except instead of having to figure it out all on their own, they had this artifact to look at of what game B was. So now you have this intergenerational transition to where the original things that the people were trying to figure out about game B, now they have this artifact to say what game B is. So there's this different perception that happens. And I've actually spoke with Zach Stein about this quite a bit. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's done a lot of work on, he has a book called Education in a Time Between Worlds, and this is about the new education paradigm. And the conversation that we've had a lot of work on was the difference that happens when people are wanting to find something out and they have the challenge, the necessity of finding it out for themselves and charting their own path, how that's a different experience than having it given to you, do this, this, this. So there's something in the nature of working as game B or engaging in the world in that sort of way that really kind of requires this incorporation of doing it on your own and figuring it out. It's almost as if the codification of it, trying to take that shortcut, diminishes something in the character development of the individual. So that's why I'm interested in this conversation, is because that is hard to articulate, but it's very important. Does that make sense?
Mm. So the codification is problematic.
It can be, yes. Particularly if it's trying to be a shortcut in some way, because it almost, there's something about the drive and desire to figure things out that you've never figured out before that's really important. So making it too easy almost short circuits that and loses that aspect.
Yeah. All right. There is an image that I have in mind which I don't know if it applies. So I'm just going to share this. So this idea of standing on the shoulders of giants, that kind of thing, right? Where there's still work to do, right? You will have to do the next step, but kind of like the work that the giants have done before helps you reach that point. And I wonder if it applies. And there is a sense in which, or like I have the feeling that there is something in this new space where it doesn't. But I'm wondering then, what is the contribution that we could make for newcomers, or even for the people who are still wondering how could I participate more, if it's not a codification?
Well, that's the interesting part, is that there is something that can help, and there is standing on the shoulders of giants, and I think that is very important. But I also think that it is important to preserve the fact that there is still work to be done, and we need people to work on those things. It's like it must all be unfinished. It can never be finished, right? It needs the constant input from people who have new perspectives and working on that sort of thing. When we go to a point and say, well, this is how it is, and then we have defined it, then it starts to lose something. So how do we do it in a way that helps people, but also preserves that sort of very important challenge, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know you had something to say, Wendy. What was it?
I can't remember now.
Sorry.
I have a few thoughts. I know just a few concepts I kind of wanted to throw out there. Is I know that expression "standing on the shoulders of giants," is used to describe, like the scientific process and scientific research and kind of advancing human knowledge. I know in one talk, John Vervaeke referred to science as, with science, he said, there is no solid ground, you're lost at sea. you know, science is actually more like sailing, and there's sort of self-deception, there's deception everywhere you look. And that, you know, almost like, you know, rather than having this building engineering metaphor, the scientific process, it's more of, you know, imagine, you know, somebody sort of single-handed sailing at, you know, on the sea of water, and the waters are choppy. And which then makes me think about the, when it does come to people who sail, like when they gather in, you know, yacht clubs. Steve is a sailor, so often I'm able to look at him for sailing metaphors. Like, what is it that, when I look at other, you know, sailors, often they each have their own boats, but what is it that they do together? Like, they race together, they gather in a clubhouse together. Of course, you know, they're sharing, you know, information all the time about the weather. But it's very, very different from, say, how, you know, people who are like building a bridge kind of come together and work. So that's one thing. And then also too, I guess the idea of the like idea maze that Balaji, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. He's you know, somebody who's in venture capital and active on Twitter and involved with sort of the cryptocurrency scene. I know he talked about he's talked a bit about the idea of having, you know, kind of discoveries from having the sense of an idea maze, that you have your own idea maze that you are exploring and navigating, like your own labyrinth, and that having that kind of quest or journey of navigating the idea maze is sort of like perhaps like a powerful frame for entrepreneurship. I mean, right now I feel like I'm navigating this idea maze of figuring out what to do with like garbage and recycling at the movie theater. And when I put on this idea maze of like feeling like, oh wait, nobody has really figured out the best way to handle all this stuff for a movie theater in Kingston. Like, I'm totally on uncharted territory here. Like, this is uncharted territory. This is my problem to kind of figure out. And then maybe if I do actually figure out something good, I can share the solution maybe with other businesses. Or how do I, like, what is there that I figure out that I then need to put in conversation with other people to help others. Like, I'm not going to solve other people's garbage or recycling problems, but I shouldn't just solve my, you know, the problem for the screening room and then sort of be done with it. Like, that just feels far too individualistic, and that there's some kind of problem solving that I might be doing that I do sort of solve the problem in a way, and other people can use that solution. So yeah, there is like this information. Yeah, like, anyways, I don't even know what the point is. I'm just putting those images on the table.
Yeah, that's, I get where it's like this individualistic thing to just, okay, I solved the problem and that's it. There's something to kind of evoke in other people and try and help them do as well. And that's, I'm really interested in, you know, preserving that. And the way that I see it is, it's not about an individual problem, but there is a sort of a way of engaging that we understand as a part of the game B, and being attracted to it, and what's brought us here and our path forward here. Even the types of things that we're taking on individually, whether it is the recycling thing locally, or whether it is, you know, how to help people be in this space better. It's how do we not just teach people how to solve the problem for themselves, how to find those problems for themselves that they feel like is theirs to take on, and also cultivate the type of personality that can do that, and also bring forward the same thing, right? The same thing of teaching other people to find their thing to do, right? So we're standing on the shoulders of giants because we shouldn't have to solve the problems that other people have already solved. But how can we solve the problem of helping people learn how to be problem solvers, right? It's like, I want to preserve that sort of, that challenge and that nature that we have to find these problems and solve them. It's like the what is it? The initiative that you had, Nick, to come into this space and want to do the onboarding thing. The initiative that you have, Wendy, on how to solve the recycling thing within your space. These are things that you recognize that are calling you. How do we help people identify that and take those on and establish collaborations that teach the same sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's something there. We can grab onto it and help people learn that, but I don't think it's really very straightforward as do this, this, and this, check these boxes. You know what I mean?
There is a sense of wanting to keep the center free.
Yeah.
Something like that. Like, okay, we can add to the thing, but we should not put something in the center, like Jim Ratt's manifesto idea, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there should be a number of manifestos all around and all from a specific perspective, but there is no Game B manifesto.
And then, of course, people in the space who are just allergic to manifestos. And then, although part of it then is also actually, it is sort of like a cultural tone of saying that, like, yeah, somebody can propose the manifesto and then somebody can say, I am allergic to manifestos. And it's not like you have to, in terms of, if you're allergic to manifestos, there's no, like, you then have to, like, get off board. Well, it's funny, I'm just thinking of the onboarding and then offboarding. I guess, to what extent, if there is onboarding, does that then imply that there's such a thing as, like, offboarding or something to get off of, or there's to getting kicked out, you know?
Well, I've heard Jordan say, if you don't want to play Game B anymore, just stop playing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, there's a lot of offboarding to that part. But he's also said, and this comes to mind now, the thing that can be named is not the thing, right? So if it's a process that we can name and write out as step-by-step how to do it or what one needs to do, then that inherently doesn't capture it, right? There's something more to it. So that's the real challenge I see with the onboarding thing, is how do you preserve that? And I see this fallacy happen a lot where people go into a group and they have trouble understanding what's going on, and there's obviously, yes, we can make it easier, but in the process of trying to make it easier, missing the fact that the challenge in doing so was such a large part of it, right? So how do we keep that?
At this point, I'm wondering what would be an anti-onboarding?
The anti-onboarding. Well, it's funny, again, with the onboarding language, like, it makes me think of, like, a big boat, and onboarding, it makes me think of, like, a plank from, like, imagine there's the dock. So there's sort of like the solid earth, solid ground, you walk out onto the wooden dock, and then there's this plank, which is the board, you know, which takes you on board the boat. The boat's floating on water, and then at some point, you know, the board is going to be kind of cast aside, and then the boat goes out to sea, and there's many people sailing together on the boat, and of course there's like a skipper or kind of a captain of the ship, and then, you know, and everybody kind of has these roles in order to sort of sail the ship together. And so is that, like, first of all, is that image a more kind of game A? Is that a more kind of game A? What's game A about that image? Is game B just like a bunch of people single-handedly, like, sailing their boats around together? Is it cruising, or is it, yeah, everybody goes out and races and they come back and have drinks in the clubhouse? Like, I'm thinking about, like, like, onboarding, but the idea is almost like to say that there is a board, that it's to say to somebody who's on solid ground that you already have a ship. Like, there is like a boat, like there is a boat for you to sail in these waters, and you can go aboard that boat, but it's your boat to go aboard, and you're going to be sailing it on your own, but there's going to be other people sailing with you, and like there is something larger for you to participate. And also too, like, the idea that, like, it's in terms of that single-handed thing, it is to, you also want to avoid something that's not game B, is being lost at sea completely by yourself. Like, you know, like I've been picturing that the scene of somebody like on a raft by themselves, no one around, and they're completely lost. Like that's not it. Like there is something kind of hyper social and connected, but yeah, again, that sovereignty maintaining thing. So imagine kind of like what was anti-onboarding might have something to do with like inviting people to board a ship, but at the same time, like they're the captains of that ship. I don't know.
So I've yeah, there's a couple of things that come up for me with that is I think that's one of the things to me that really sparks the need for an onboarding process is that people are joining and then they don't know what to do. They're curious, they come to the strange attractor, and they're not sure how to engage or participate. So trying to find some way to help them learn or find groups to collaborate with and what resonates with them and get to that other space. I know Phil and Wendy, you both, through different collaborations that we've had, you've seen that the Game Bee Facebook group is not all there is to it. There's so much more outside of that that people don't even see that's going on. And a lot of this is collaboration that's in real life. It's collaboration in other spaces. It's just not taking place or being talked about right there. So how can we open it up for people who are joining to know that there is this level of collaboration that's happening and understand how to get to that space? We understand that rule omega in competent conversation is one of the prerequisites to be able to collaborate, but where do they go, right? That's one of the conversations I was having with Jim Rutt about this new environment or forum that he's looking to build that's a little bit larger than the Facebook Game Bee space or the Game Bee Facebook page, right? Because it's not really good for collaboration. So how do we have these sorts of collaborations that are happening visible to people so that they can see what interests them and they can find ways to work to get into these different spaces, which is active, right? And actually doing things.
Something is becoming more and more like vivid in my mind, which is an experience I had as a child. I went to public school for 1 year, after which my mom then sent me to a Waldorf school. I'm not sure if you're aware. And I remember the first week being for the first time faced with a white piece of paper, completely blank. No, you know, like things that were already drawn and I just had to fill in the colors, right? And I was completely frustrated as a child. Like, what, you know, what do I do with this? It's just white, a white canvas, you know. And in a sense, that was life-changing, that decision for me, because I was completely fit for public school. Would have had like the straightest career or like ladder ever. And instead I was forced with this, yeah, this creativity, this initiative, the having to, you know, fill the canvas. So at this point, I'm wondering, like, how can we present newcomers with the blank canvas?
What a lovely, lovely description of that experience. Thank you.
Do you remember though, Nick, how you felt like with the white paper? Like, did you quickly be like, do you remember feeling liberated or feeling this is better? Like, do you remember responding positively?
No, not at all. As a child, I mean, it took me weeks to adapt. I was always complaining, I don't want to go to this school, I want to go back to my old school. And the teacher was very patient and kind and guided me and helped me, well, you know.
It's funny, I was kind of chuckling as you described it, because I went to a school that was fairly progressive, and it's the kind of school that was cultivating, you know, kind of independent thought and creativity, although probably not as, I don't know, extreme as a Waldorf school. But I remember each morning there was kind of this drawing activity, and I remember we were told, draw a picture and write 3 sentences. And beyond that, it could be whatever, right? And I arrived at the story that I thought was great, which was like, this is a bunny. The bunny is going for a walk. It is a sunny day. And sometimes I would change it and make it a rainy day or swap in a dog. But basically, this is an animal. The animal is going for a walk. And then here it's the weather. Like, that was my formula. And I just drew that formula for like a few months. every single morning. And I'm like, I've nailed it. This is the story to tell. And then at some point, the teacher actually, like when we were doing like a parent teacher night, was like talking to my mom and talking about this and said like the idea here is to actually write a different story and draw something different every time, not the same thing. And they were like nudging me to mix it up. And I'm like, I don't see what the problem is here. This is a great, great story. And I mean, I did go on to actually really like art and drawing and really would express myself through drawing. But yeah, I don't know. It is fine in terms of like that system. Like some people, like it is fine in terms of that systemization or kind of reducing things down to their essence or that repetition. Like sometimes that is what makes the soul sing rather than just like endless creativity, endless, you know, the endless organic growing garden. Like there is this urge to rationalize and systematize and formula, you know, create formulas, and that there can be this like intrinsic joy in creating a formula. And of course, Nick, you're a programmer, right? Like the creativity for you, creativity is the creating the system, you know?
Yeah, not necessarily sticking to the system, but yes, creating the system. Phil.
Well, happy to be here with you. Quite overwhelmed at this point, so I might jump off soon. But it's nice to come and see you all and able to ease in a little bit.
Yeah. We already had a chat a bit.
But you guys can continue.
Yeah, just so that you know, I already had a chat with Phil last week a bit about this onboarding. But yeah, I can't seem to get to the specifics.
So, Jonelle, you referred to there being work. You did say, oh, there is work to be done. Mm-hmm. Like in your mind, like within sort of the, I guess sort of like growing the network, say, or in terms of dealing with somehow working with like new energy or new people coming in. You said there's work to be done. What in your mind do you perceive as being work to be done?
So last time I was in California, I had a fantastic conversation with a guy named Kedrick, and we were talking about how to grow these things. We were talking about this particular thing, and new people coming in, instead of indoctrinating them, how do you incorporate what they know into what we know, into like this sort of weaving into it as it grows, right? So that there isn't this core centralized idea that is crystallized, this is how it works, but that there is a seed, and its growth depends on the individuals bringing in their experiences in a particular manner, like using Rule Omega and using this sort of non-rivalrous sort of thing, but weaving in their stories and their experiences and allowing those things to be brought in, and how that makes everything grow out of it. So maybe something is more like teaching people, or onboarding encompassing how to engage in that way, not what to engage in, but how to engage in a way that's cultivating to the whole space, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe something even more meta.
Yeah. I actually, in terms of the anti-onboarding, you describing that made me imagine this image of this anti-onboarding. I guess when I think of traditional like organizational onboarding, the idea is the person kind of arrives as kind of this blank slate that needs to be indoctrinated or trained or oriented. And instead, I'm imagining this new person kind of entering this room, and then everyone kind of looks at them and be like, maybe you know what to do. Tell us what you know. You have like you share with us what you know, because that's going to be a piece of the puzzle, right? Like there's sort of like, you start with this presumption that this other person has those pieces of the puzzle and they have this expertise. And it's almost like,
yeah,
like, okay, we're going to
take us to the next level. You know?
Yeah.
So
It
part of,
strikes me. Sorry,
go ahead.
please go.
So my experience, I've had a lot of experience on cross-functional teams in research and development, reverse engineering, rapid prototyping, and I do not have any specialized degree in anything. I'm not an engineer. I don't have a PhD in any sort of thing, but I was always a support type technician. So I had so many wonderful experiences on these teams with these incredibly brilliant people that had all these different answers and ideas. And I never knew what the hell was going on. So being new on these teams, being like less knowledgeable about what's happening, what I learned was that my strength was the questioning. Why do you do it this way? What can we do differently? Why don't we try this? You know, what types of things can we try? What I learned was the people who are almost like the elders who have this sort of developed knowledge that they hold, that's really important. But they also, to get that, it comes at a cost. It brings this sort of myopic view to get that deep of knowledge. So it's so important to have new people come and ask these questions to help challenge that and bring out new perspectives. And that's what I've always brought to the teams that I was on in the past. And that's kind of what I see is the strength of new people coming in is so important. Otherwise, you get into this crystallized myopic view of how things should be, and that becomes fragile.
It strikes me that onboarding is the wrong word. Maybe integrating is.
Oh, I like that one.
Kind of like someone on a YouTube video made a super nice comment of like the idea that the as the tree grows, it becomes more like world in a sense. Like the world becomes more tree, the tree becomes more world. Something like that. Like it's not just the seed that becomes bigger somehow. I'm just riffing.
No, I like that.
And then there was something else. For me, something that this idea of anti-onboarding evokes is actually a kind of a withdrawing, and maybe a bit something like a becoming occult, you know. So you said there is a lot going on underground, and maybe that's okay. Maybe Facebook should remain like this chatty, loud place, and the people who are ready will hear what's behind and reach out.
So one of the things that we've noticed, or that I've been watching too, and this is unfortunate, but I can understand why it's happening. So as that first group of people began to find the groups that they resonated with and went on to collaboration further, they were taken out of the Facebook group. They like their time was spent elsewhere, not so much in that space. So that means the people who are most integrated into how to gain B outside of the Facebook group page are not really present to cultivate that with people who are coming in, especially as we've been having a lot of people come in really quickly compared to the early days of it. So like even myself, I don't get to spend a whole lot of time in the Facebook group as I did before, and certainly not in the collaborations in the manner that I did. It's a lot larger group now. It's how do we, kind of keep that sort of interaction between people who are collaborating outside or underground with the people coming in? How do we help them make that bridge, right?
I think I was listening to a podcast. Actually, it's the podcast. So that Christian, I guess Christian Stark, who I think all of you are familiar with. It was him appearing on a podcast called An Infinite Path, and it's very much like a spirituality and kind of sort of sort of a solo spiritual, not solo, sort of a spiritual journey outside of, you know, organized structure type of podcast. But he described the, what was that? When you mentioned the image of like of, I guess when it comes to a certain kind of like spaces, these sort of like groups that allow for a certain kind of spiritual questing. There is a door. They describe like there is a door. The door is there, and anyone can enter through the door. But like the door doesn't have a sign. Like it's not a business announcing itself with a sign. It's more like the door is there, and you can walk through it freely, but nobody is inviting you to the door. And yeah, I do imagine a space, or, you know, again, like the sort of idea maze where there are doors, and there are many doors, and the doors maybe shouldn't be advertised, but they should be like
visible.
Visible, visible, right? And it's funny because in a physical space, you know, you can walk around and you can choose to kind of pay attention. And if you pay attention, you will see the doors on the buildings. But in the online space, you have to participate to make something visible, right? Like a Zoom room is not, when it sits empty, it's nowhere, right? Like the Zoom room only exists when we're in it, right? Like the Zoom room is not visible if there's no one in it. There's no door, right? So like there's this, it just makes me think of some kind of new way. What would be some new way in this virtual online realm for their, you know, like what do those doors look like? Or how can people, or even showing people how to recognize doors. I mean, the doors, maybe they're already there. It's not about building the doors. It's about like almost sort of some kind of not encouragement, but clues or hints, or, you know, telling people how to look for doors that they could walk through.
And that's one of the things that I'm really drawn to, and why I show up and participate in the way that I do. I really like anything that seems to be a hint of collaboration that somebody wants to do. I'm really keen on trying to find a way to instantiate that and bring the group together. Because what I see is it's in groups like this where people get to know each other and establish those relationships and are able to pass through that doorway, right? There are multiple things that we've collaborated on, that I've collaborated on, where the thing itself doesn't seem that important, but what happens after, you know, once you walk through that initial door and say, yes, I want to show up and collaborate, what can I do, right? Once you get to that space, and it's almost this personal transition of the act of walking through the door, right? That changes your ability to interact with people and how they interact with you. So yeah, I agree that the door should be absolutely visible. And I think that's one of the things that the Game Bee Facebook group is really struggling with, because it's not so clear where you go after that. You get to the Game Bee Facebook group page, then what? Right?
I enjoy these type of Zoom calls, even though we're not physically in person. It feels much more intimate. I think starting to think the question would be, how do we increase something like this, right? I think it was someone who was like, I think, so I had one of these Zoom calls, a couple of Zoom calls last week, one with David, who I think Nick met last week. And it was because he wrote up his bio and it's like, oh, I want to do some resources. And then someone tagged me. I'm like, oh yeah, let's chat. Let's get on a Zoom call. And then it was very quick. Of course, like, oh yes, sounds like someone who wants to help. And then, yeah, that made sense. It's like, these are type of pathways that I currently see, but how do we increase these type of interactions? It's kind of hard because we have 1,000 people now. Like, how do you know who you want to talk to? I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Well, I think it's acceptable to say that a large part of those people won't get to that space. People go to the Game Bee space for lots of different reasons. And it's almost as if that challenge is necessary to sort out people who really aren't sure whether or not they're ready to go through the door, right? So there's something to that I feel is important. But my experience, and one of the things that I wish that I could really explain to people in the Game B space, is that just showing up there, finding people you resonate with, just getting into a Zoom call about something, that's how you really start to establish those relationships and connections. That's how I get to know people. And then even going further beyond that, through that pathway, I have physically met people from the Game B space and become, yeah, Bill, I've met you a couple of times, you know, and I'm looking to go out to where you're at, Wendy, and hopefully I'll get to do that quite soon. But this is the, like, the progression, you know, Facebook page, find people, Zoom talk, really resonate, find who that is, and then move on to this in real life sort of thing. So that's what I would be interested in if there was a sort of, I guess, integration sort of aspect, that also.
I think actually that just the existence of, I mean, YouTube, well, it's funny how, like, in terms of the social network, the Facebook group lately has sort of been where, like, okay, in terms of the social network, Facebook is where there's this focus, it's where there's text, but really it's video. Like, I feel like, yeah, it's video where I think it really lives. I mean, yes, it calls like this, but also, I mean, Game B Space was animated by, you know, Jordan Hall in particular, talking over video, like, and on on YouTube and on podcasts, you know. And I think Nick, I mean, so Janelle, I don't know if you're aware of the speaking challenge that Nick is doing
No.
and done in the past on YouTube. I'm doing it myself, but it's I guess it's sort of like, you know, committing to record a series of videos where you're just talking to the camera and you're just practicing speaking to the camera and uploading it to YouTube.
You were telling me about that. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Practice. So this is day 3 of, you know, me doing the speaking challenge. And Nick, you did this, yeah, because you've done this a few times. You originally did it how many years ago?
Yeah, I mean, that was like two years ago, in the middle of the Jordan Peterson wave. I wanted to read all the books that he recommends and then talk about them. And that's why I started a YouTube channel, but it was taking me weeks and months to read the books. And then whenever I was standing in front of the camera, I was feeling so awkward. And then I said, okay, I need to do something about this. And then I gave myself this 30-day speaking challenge where I was basically recording myself for 5 minutes, unprepared, without even knowing what I would talk about, and upload it to YouTube. And that's how my, you know, online, I don't know, for sure my YouTube channel got kickstarted that way, and I learned to become way more comfortable in front of the camera without the frame, without being prepared in that sense. And so it was beneficial. And these 3 days ago, or 5 days ago, I said, why not do it again? You know, like 2 years have passed. And so I'm kind of doing that. And Wendy started her own challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, I knew you had done the speaking challenge, but it was only through you doing it again more recently that I was like, oh, I could, you know, resurrected the idea. And I'm like, oh, I should do this too. I think this is something that I can do right now with my time constraints. And this, yeah, I felt like in terms of my own leverage points, improving my expressive capacity, as well as being comfortable with the vulnerability of putting yourself on YouTube. I thought, like, okay, if I can, like, widen that bottleneck for me, I felt like that, yeah, that's leverage point. That's some kind of widening. But yeah, in my mind, I do kind of imagine, like, oh, if the Game B, like, to the extent that the Game B scene could, like, very much actually just migrate to you, like, some, like, mycelium network over Zoom and YouTube. Like, in my mind, that seems good. But of course, text does have a role, but it's, yeah, I do imagine just some kind of almost flipping of habits when it comes to the habits of writing out your thoughts versus speaking them. And then kind of moving more to, like, an oral, yeah, just thinking about, like, the kind of powers of kind of, like, oral culture.
Yeah, well, and work in the transcription world that we've been involved in as of late, it's very stark, the difference between the oral world and the written world. So very different in the structure of thoughts and engaging people. That's one of the hardest things I find, translating spoken conversation to written conversation. There's so much nuance in the conversation that just reading it you lose.
Yeah, has been like kind of a leitmotif of our group, right? When to switch to video from the written form, you know. But there is something that is bleeding over to the written form, at least with us, which is when things are not going well, we know that we can get back to this and fix things. You know, now we have this shared understanding, which maybe allows us to be a bit more risky, or it would allow us. I'm not sure that we actually exploited that, but I think that sense that actually we've been through the motions enough times that, yeah, maybe some tension arises, but then we can go and sit in a call and really fix the thing in a way faster. So that's some sovereignty, right? Some skill.
Well, isn't that in essence community?
Yeah.
My feature request for whatever Jim Rhett is working on as an online forum is having a feature where if two people exchange a certain number of text communications back and forth in a forum, like if there's like 4 or more text messages between 2 people in a text conversation, the text communication channel gets cut off, and then you're forced onto video. Like you're then forced to talk to each other. So in terms of the kind of text flame war stuff, it's like you cut it off. It's like, okay, like whether you two are really hitting it off in a positive way or you're fighting, like take it outside. And we're outside being, the Zoom room or the bedroom or something, right? Where you have to, you actually need to change mediums. You need to change conversation spaces. You're two people who clearly have something to kind of communicate to each other. And then it's sort of forcing this medium where, it's a completely different kind of understanding.
Another feature could be like that there is a sovereignty ruler that you have to kind of set after every written message, like I wrote this message, but I don't feel so sovereign. So enter, and then you send the message and the sovereignty level.
I might be jumping off soon, but I want to share one final thought. Thinking a lot around like fitness landscape. So like how would an onboarding fit the current landscape of things? And I'm imagining like most of it ends up going through to Facebook, the Facebook group. And then that would generally mean that maybe this group should be like looking at the onboarding specifically on the Facebook group. So like, what are the questions that the people are answering? The 3 questions right now. Maybe we want more, maybe we want less. Or what are the units currently? It's like Facebook isn't the best platform, but it might make sense to like build off of that. I don't know. I remember messaging Jordan about this before. Be like, oh, let's build the onboarding process on the Facebook. I'm not sure where that went. But yeah, that's just some thought. Or at least like GameBee Wiki, GameBee Guide can be a link that people can see very early on in the thing, where if you want to, you can go down this path or something. I don't know. But it does seem like if you are going to the Facebook group, if we're all funneling into there, then something attached to Facebook will need to happen.
Yeah, that's something I'd be happy to ask the admin group. So yeah, if there's something that we can do with the questions that might be a little bit more helpful, or even, I know they have a couple of units that you have to go through in the group, like lessons. Maybe there's something that we can do in that space that will help people who come in just get some orientation. Right?
Yeah, I think we have like somehow figured out some sort of principle, which is like text is great, try and get video calls, and maybe that could be one of the rules as well, or added as a principle, because I've seen that be talked about as well as an example. So
Yeah, also maybe pointing out something about the collaborations. Like if you see a collaboration happening and you're interested in it, join the group call, see what it's about, you know, participate. It's a participatory thing, I feel. And I don't know if that's so obvious to other people.
I see that this call is being recorded, Nick. Is this, while we are still all here, is this something that we could just post on YouTube publicly and then just link to from the Facebook group?
It's up to you.
Is there a YouTube channel that we are using, or are you using yours? I'm just wondering if there's
Not that I'm aware of.
YouTube channel.
I mean, some of these videos have recorded in the Game Bee Coffee House. There is the Coffee House YouTube channel. Like the,
oh, there's a Coffee House YouTube channel.
Yeah, the Jordan Hall wormhole was posted there, for example.
Yeah.
Is that in the Game Bee host guide?
Yeah.
Like what? How to access the Game Bee Coffee House YouTube channel?
No,
I think
you know,
Kristen does it, no?
Okay.
All I know of is that Game Bee Coffee House was that was put up by Christian, and it was like when there were 300 or 400 people, it was kind of a post that came up, and it was a hot thing for a while. But as of late, it hasn't even really been mentioned too much. So all these new people coming in might not even know about it. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Yeah, it's a matter of, yeah, because I don't think there's, you know, in terms of people hosting, anybody can host something in it, but I don't know. The Game Bee Coffee House did itself kind of catch on as a little bit of a meme, but the idea that anybody could host anything and at any time did not quite catch on. And yeah, there is a short, yeah, there's not, it takes a certain temperament to host something. Although I know one thing that I think I discovered and Christian discovered, that often anybody who hosts something, it actually sticks their neck out and hosts something. There's normally like a strong response, right? Yeah,
all our calls have been here.
Phil, I have a Game Bee. It's not comprehensive, but I have created a Game Bee YouTubing playlist where whenever I notice people who are, you know, tuned into the Game Bee discourse and they post videos on YouTube of themselves talking about whatever, I'll just put it in my YouTubing list. So that indirectly points to a number of people's channels, and it does kind of reveal. I mean, actually, maybe I could try to make it more complete, but it does kind of reveal who in the Game Bee space is comfortable. It reveals who's comfortable with putting themselves on YouTube, for starters. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I really like the Game Bee Wiki. Yeah, I like the Game Bee Wiki. I think this is a good place to start to weave that together. What were you saying, Bill?
No, I think this conversation is interesting. I think we could get into something here that is kind of like, solving Game Bee in some sort of way. We're trying to figure out how to collaborate and build that interior that hopefully allows us to grow or something like that. So yeah, that feels interesting. And there's something alive here that I'll think about. And the wiki is slowly getting off the ground.
Are you okay with us with the idea of uploading this to YouTube?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Janelle?
Yep, I am also. Yeah, I'm good. I do have to hop off though, so it was a pleasure speaking with you guys. I'm really excited to see where this is going to go.
Thank you for joining.
Yes.
Bye, guys.
Yes. Bye. See you.